The US seeking new partners in Gaza diplomacy. John Kerry turns to Turkey and Qatar for assistance. But can these countries deliver, and under what terms? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. Hopes for a long-term ceasefire hang in the balance on this day, which began with Israel resuming its shelling and was then followed by Palestinian factions announcing a 24-hour ceasefire. And as the death toll passes 1,000 Palestinians, world leaders continue to try to reach some kind of deal on a long-term truce. On Saturday, there was evidence of a change in direction by US Secretary of State John Kerry, who's been at the center of efforts to secure an end to hostilities. He met the foreign ministers of Turkey and Qatar. Both countries are seen as political backers of Hamas. And despite some concern in Egypt and Israel, Kerry made clear the efforts of Turkey and Qatar would bolster, not replace, earlier initiatives.
We're grateful, obviously, for the Egyptian initiative, for the Israeli efforts initially, but also this particular effort now has been significantly assisted by the input of Qatar, the input of Turkey, and the willingness of these foreign ministers to work hard, even though they were at a distance, and to engage directly with some of the Palestinian factions in order to try to help get us where we are today. They're both committed to trying to work to continue further, and we very much appreciate that.
And that was a view echoed by the Qatari foreign minister.
Contrary to what's been reported, Qatar is not opposed to Egypt playing a role. Actually, Qatar and Turkey and all the Arab countries, as well as the other allies, believe that Egypt's role is important. In fact, Egypt should be taking the lead in this crisis. Qatar has not objected. In fact, we made several moves to support the role of our brothers in Egypt.
Well, for more discussion on this, I'm joined by our guests. In London, Ian Black, Middle East editor at The Guardian, and also from London, Nadim Shehadi, Associate Fellow at Chatham House. He's also directs a program on the regional dimension of the Palestinian refugee issue in the Middle East. Welcome to you both. Let's begin with Nadim Shehadi. What is the significance of the US Secretary of State establishing direct contact with Turkey and Qatar over the issue of Gaza?
Well, in the desperate search for mediators, Turkey and Qatar have better relations with the Muslim Brotherhood and with Hamas, certainly better relations than Egypt has. And since he cannot talk directly to Hamas himself, and the Egyptians won't talk to Hamas, then Qatar and Turkey can play an important role. But the elephant in the room, the missing link here, is also whether there is an Iranian role to be brought in, because some of the factions in Gaza, like Islamic Jihad and some of the sort of independent factions or some factions within Hamas, may still be linked to Iran and may still be leading on this. The most important strategic change that this latest Gaza incident has brought is that it has dragged Hamas back into the fold of the old resistance bloc, which includes Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, and Hamas, included Iran, until Hamas, in a way, was pulled out of it because of the Syrian disagreements over the Syrian crisis.
Well, there's a number of issues that you brought up there, Nadim Shehadi, which we will return to over the process of the discussion. But to go to Ian Black now, and your view on the involvement of Turkey and Qatar.
Well, I think it's very simple. I agree with Nadim. John Kerry had to bring the Qataris and the Turks into this because the Americans and the Europeans and the Egyptians don't have a channel of communication to Hamas, which is one of the two protagonists in this terrible story in Gaza. I think you have to put politics and ideology to one side and just look at the practicalities of trying to achieve an agreement in a desperate situation where people are dying in their scores, if not more, every single day. Hamas, Nadim referred to this, Hamas had to leave its headquarters in Damascus because of its refusal to back the Syrian government against the uprising. Its political leadership has relocated to Doha, where Khalid Mashal is. There's an important channel of communication going on there. The relationship with Turkey is an important one too. And in the background is the rupture in relations with Egypt since the overthrow of Mohamed Morsi by Abdel Fattah Sisi just over a year ago. So, diplomatic and political practicalities require somebody who can speak on behalf of, or at the very least be a channel of communication with one of the sides to this chapter of the conflict. I think the difficulty is, and we can see this emerging very starkly today, is that the fault line, the geopolitical fault line that runs across the Middle East runs right through the middle of the already very difficult situation of finding a way out of this crisis, let alone moving to something more lasting beyond it. But this is a case, I think, of needs must, and Kerry has had to talk to them, and without that channel of communication, it would be even more difficult than it clearly already is.
Well, Nadim Shehadi, we heard both John Kerry himself and the Qatari foreign minister saying that this was in no way pushing aside Egypt from its now traditional role in this type of mediation. Was this just diplomatic niceties? Is Egypt, the Egypt of al-Sisi, being pushed aside because it is unable or reluctant to lead the negotiation process?
In a way it is, but also Egypt is indispensable to this because of the long-term influence Egypt has on Gaza, the control of the borders, and many of the demands of Hamas are related to lifting the siege, which now Egypt looks like it's contributing to. But the other important factor is that we are talking about Hamas. We are no longer talking about the PLO or the PA or Abu Mazen as the interlocutor. And this is one of the major results of the latest flare-up. It is that Hamas is now the interlocutor, and whatever concessions are obtained by Hamas in the next ceasefire will be at the expense of the PLO, because the PLO has never been able to obtain anything through negotiations, and Hamas will demonstrate that through violence and resistance it can obtain results.
Ian Black, the position of Israel in this, deeply uncomfortable, no doubt, with Qatar's presence in this, and also uncomfortable with the fact that Turkey is taking a role in the process, although relations between Israel and Turkey have improved slightly in recent times. Do you think that it will impact on Israel's position in approaching a ceasefire or truce?
Well, we've seen, anybody who's been looking at the Israeli coverage of this crisis over the last 24 hours, you've seen a lot of comments, mostly from unidentified officials, but pretty credible sounding sources, complaining bitterly about the way in which Kerry has been seen to involve Qatar and Turkey in this. But more significantly than that, and related to it, the Israeli version of events, and I'm just talking here on the basis of what I've seen reported, was that the draft ceasefire agreement, which failed to materialize on Friday, didn't, in that Israeli view, in any way take on board Israel's security concerns about it. Talked about a ceasefire, of course, but it didn't say anything about the tunnels that the Israelis are so focused on. And the impression you get from looking at Israeli official responses to this was that they felt that their concerns had been sidelined, and they're linking that to the role that Kerry has encouraged and promoted for Qatar and Hamas. I mean, I think the difficulty, one of the fundamental difficulties of looking at this crisis, is different perspectives. You see Israel presenting it as a war in which short-term needs dictate everything. And on the Palestinian side, the story and the narrative, to use that fashionable word, goes back much beyond that. It goes back to the long blockade of Gaza and far beyond that too, to the disastrous situation that the Palestinians are in. So there's this imbalance, if you like, in the way that different narratives are constructed. The Israeli focus is on their immediate short-term security needs, rockets and tunnels and so on, and you see that the responses to the Qatari and Turkish involvement in the ceasefire initiative, in their view, has marginalized their own most central concerns, and they're sounding pretty angry on that basis.
Nadim Shehadi, is there a sense that in approaching or looking for a formula for a short-term ceasefire or truce, the parties are actually beginning to realize that what they are actually looking at is a new framework for wider negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians about, fundamentally, the issue of occupation? Is there a sense that the parties are beginning to realize this?
Well, certainly the parties are realizing now the cost of the failed negotiations back in March, April. And this cost will be borne by the United States and by its allies because the interlocutors coming to the forefront now are not friends of the United States. They're like Hamas and others. So this is part of a global U.S. global perception of U.S. power. The U.S. is seen, I think it was Kissinger who said this, as treacherous to its friends and weak to its enemies, and it's no longer the mediator that can impose solutions or whose word is listened to or that can draw red lines or whatever lines with any credibility. And that's I think is a problem that the US will find in any conflict that it tries to address, whether in the Middle East or outside.
Well, we're joined by our third guest now from Jerusalem, Nathan Thrall, the senior analyst in the Middle East and North Africa program at the International Crisis Group. And I'll pull you straight in, Nathan Thrall. The discussion that has been underway is the way in which the whole negotiation process or attempts at negotiation is shifting fundamentally in terms of attempts to find a truce to end the ongoing Gaza conflict, in particular the involvement of Turkey and Qatar in attempts to find a short-term truce. What is the significance of this, do you believe?
Well, I think the main thing that everyone is dealing with now is no longer the document that Kerry put forward on Friday, but everyone is really focused on the 24-hour ceasefire and whether that's going to take hold and stay for the full 24 hours. After that, we may see a return to some kind of modification and process over bargaining over that document that Kerry put forward on Friday. But we're not quite there yet, and that's not the only way that this conflict can end. There's still quite a possibility that this could end in the way that Operation Cast Lead from 2008 to 2009 did, which was essentially through unilateralism. And what we could see is Israel going after the tunnels for several more days. Either this ceasefire takes hold or it doesn't, but after the 24 hours, let's say, Israel goes after tunnels to its satisfaction for 5 or 3 or 10 more days. And then at that point, it withdraws unilaterally. And Hamas would probably launch a couple of rockets and say that they don't accept it. And Israel would respond from the air. And then the hope would be that it would simply peter out. And then you would have really no resolution to these issues in Gaza. So I think that remains a real possibility for ending this and not a desirable one for any of the parties concerned.
Well, Ian Black, this issue of it petering out, what we've been discussing is looking at far more fundamental things happening here than the establishment of a short-term ceasefire or of a short-term truce. If it is going to be a longer-term truce or ceasefire, then obviously that has to be looked at on a far wider basis, does it not, than an immediate cessation of hostilities?
Well, you know, we all agree that it's difficult to see how an immediate ceasefire is going to be brought about. I'm inclined to agree with Nathan Thrall that one distinct possibility is that it will peter out with unilateral decisions on each side, that enough has been done in pursuit of their own respective goals. So that's difficult. Moving from that, or establishing a link between a ceasefire or a return to calm and some kind of resumption of a peace process, looks enormously difficult for reasons that are, of course, in the background to this latest upsurge. I mean, after all, one of the key factors that lies behind the bloodletting of the last nearly 3 weeks was the failure of a previous peace process. Now, there were plenty of people who never thought it had much chance in the first place. John Kerry devoted a lot of time and effort to it, I think 9 months, and it went nowhere. It ran into the sand. And one of the reasons that isn't a satisfactory outcome, we're getting this terrible reminder now. If there's no hope of any kind of peace process, then things can take on a dynamic of their own, of violence, miscalculation, however you describe the chain of events that led to this. So it's obviously vital, and this has been a terrible reminder of that, to get back to a situation where there's some kind of political process, some kind of possibility of negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians. And the moves that we saw in recent months towards Palestinian unity from a position of weakness of Hamas are going to be different in the aftermath of this. As Nadim pointed out, the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, Mahmoud Abbas, has done nothing so far to bring about a restoration, or at least of the status quo. When the dust settles over this, when the dead are buried, it's going to be another complicated set of circumstances from which to try to launch something new. There has to be involvement of Egypt. There has to be some easing of the blockade of Gaza. Without that, it's impossible to see any kind of forward momentum. But there's no doubt that the international community, if it deserves the name, has to make a far greater effort than it's hitherto done to get some kind of peace process back on course again.
Well, Nadim Shehadi, this is an important point and one that should be emphasized. The argument that the current conflict is a consequence of a failed negotiation process. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And I do like Nathan's scenario, but the scenario would be, the outcome of the scenario would have a result in the sense that the longer this conflict goes on, the costlier it is for the people in Gaza, for Hamas, so they would need more results to show that it was worth it. And the more damage is done to Israel's reputation, Israel's relations with the international community, and that's important, I think, also. And the most important outcome, which will change, in a way, the game in Israel, is that the last round of peace negotiations failed because the Israeli public felt that it was not concerned. They were comfortable, they were not threatened by any, there was no security threat, the economy was doing well, and it doesn't matter what happens in the peace process. In this round, they were not comfortable. So there may be another incentive, there may be a new political dynamic which would convince the Israelis that they do need a peace settlement as much as the Palestinians do.
Nathan Thrall, that argument there that the establishment of a peace may well be in Israel's national interest, do you think that is something that is being discussed in Tel Aviv by the politicians?
To be frank, I think it's quite unlikely that this Gaza conflict is going to lead immediately to a renewed peace process. In the days before, just in the last couple of weeks, Benjamin Netanyahu made a statement about Israel retaining security control over the West Bank after a Palestinian state is created. And that's a non-starter for Palestinians. There's really no point in even beginning a peace process if that's the Israeli position. And I'm quite certain that over the course of the last several weeks, Netanyahu and this government, this coalition's security demands have only gotten larger. So I think that and on the Palestinian side too, you have to see that Hamas is gaining a great deal within Palestinian politics. You already see it in the statements of PA leaders. They are radicalizing in their position, or at least moving closer to Hamas out of necessity, less than out of any sincere belief. And it's going to be very difficult for them to engage in a new peace process with this same coalition after this Gaza conflict comes to a close. The other thing I would say is this notion that this conflict is a result of the breakdown of the Kerry talks. I think that there is reason to question that. And one of the reasons to question that is simply that you had basically 3 years of peace and quiet in the West Bank before Kerry began the process. And there was a quote-unquote political vacuum with no negotiations taking place, and really total security for Israel and calm in the West Bank. So I don't know that Israeli decision makers feel that the conclusion they should draw from this conflict is a peace process will alleviate it.
Well, Ian Black, that issue about an intensification of resistance, the game has changed, it would appear, in the recent weeks of conflict. Hamas has got far stronger than it was. It was in a position of weakness, as was stated earlier on in the program. The Palestinian Authority needing to take a stronger position as well. The game has changed to an extent, has it not?
I'm not sure how much it's changed. I mean, I have the impression that Hamas, of course at a terrible cost, a terrible human cost, think that they're doing very well. They were understandably quite thrilled a few days back last week when one of the missiles that was fired from Gaza landed near Tel Aviv airport, which was quite an eye-catching event when it was followed, I think, by 24 or 48 hours of the suspension of flights from the US and Europe. But I think they got lucky too. And I think that one of the striking lessons, the terrible lessons of this renewed bout of violence is still the enormous imbalance between the sides. And I'm not talking about the grim business of comparing fatalities amongst Palestinians and Israelis, but just look at the technological balance. Look at the way in which the Israelis can do, again, of course, at terrible cost to people in Gaza, do whatever they want. I understand that Hamas feel that things are going their way and on a roll. I'm not sure how true it is. I'm not sure that having Qatar and Turkey helping them is going to really change the political balance. We still have the Egyptians playing a necessary and vital role simply because of geography, because of the border with Gaza. We have the Saudis who still have weight. We have the Jordanians who we don't hear much from, but certainly are no fans of Hamas. So I would just question the, I pose a question about appearance and reality in how well Hamas are doing. If they succeed in lifting the siege of Gaza, that would be an extraordinary achievement. But I don't think that's going to happen without addressing the question of what the Israelis call the demilitarization of Gaza. So I don't know.
Well, if I may, Ian, and go, apologies
go.
for interrupting, but if I may go to Nadim Shehadi very quickly with something that you mentioned right at the beginning, the elephant in the room, which is a name added onto the list that Ian Black gave there, Iran. Is Iran beginning to be a player in this? Very quickly.
Iran plays the region more like a chessboard, and it has certainly a hand in Gaza with some of the factions in Syria, in Iraq, and in Lebanon. And in a way, this latest flare-up in Gaza has helped reconstitute the resistance front, which had disintegrated because of the disagreements over the Syrian crisis. The resistance front cannot be credible as a resistance front against Israel without Hamas being part of it. So this has strengthened, in a way, Iran's hand, Syria's hand, and Hezbollah's hand in
And this is a point of another long discussion, remembering as well the immense human cost in this ongoing conflict. My thanks to our guests, Nathan Thrall, Ian Black, and Nadim Shehadi. And you can leave your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or go to @AJ Inside Story on Twitter. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.